Over the years, there have been several bizarre and high-profile wrestler firings that have been based on incidents that didn't even take place inside the ring. One such instance was when Sid Vicious went on a scissor-wielding rampage at a hotel in Blackburn. Another notorious case was when Mr. Perfect was almost responsible for causing a plane crash during the infamous plane ride from hell. That got us thinking, are there wrestlers who got themselves fired because of an actual match itself, or even because of the events around a match? Yes, there are. Welcome to German Suplex, and here are 10 matches that got wrestlers fired. Number 10. Brian Clark. In 2001, we were in the middle of the WWE invasion, which was totally well received by most fans. As a favor to The Undertaker, WWE brought in former two-time WCW Tag Champions, Brian Clark and Brian Adams, also known as Chronic. Adams had previously worked with The Undertaker when he was known as Crush. However, it turned out that there were many better tag teams than Chronic, as their first pay-per-view match against the Brothers of Destruction at Unforgiven in 2001 was unimpressive and lacked chemistry. The backstage reaction was so negative that Chronic was demoted to developmental. Clark reacted poorly and was subsequently let go. This may have been harsh, as if every wrestler who had a bad match in 2001 was fired, WWF would have consisted of only Kurt Angle and a bunch of mirrors. Number 9. The Ultimate Warrior. The 1991 SummerSlam was promoted using a match made in hell featuring Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior against Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel Mustafa, and General Adnan. However, backstage, a storm was brewing surrounding the main event of the second biggest show of the year. The Ultimate Warrior believed that WWF owed him around $500,000 due to perceived pay disparity between himself and Hogan. If Vince didn't pay up, Warrior threatened to no-show SummerSlam, even though half of the advertising was centered around his match. Despite bowing to Warrior's demands, as soon as he rushed backstage and chased off Adnan and Mustafa with a chair, he was met with a pink slip and told to leave the company. He didn't even return for the post-match celebration with Hogan. It seems that the backstage drama was the main reason why SummerSlam 1991 was memorable, rather than the kayfabe storyline. Number 8. Brad Maddox. For various reasons, Brad Maddox could be considered the true rated R superstar, despite his appearance resembling an amalgamation of Alvin, Simon, and Theodore from the Chipmunks. Maddox had a tendency to use foul language, which led to his dismissal from the company in what many believe was one of WWE's more hypocritical firings. On November 24, 2015, Maddox wrestled a dark match against R-Truth shortly before the taping of Main Event in Indianapolis. During the dark segment, Maddox called the crowd cocky pricks, which was not cleared by the company. Vince was in attendance, and Maddox got in trouble, resulting in his release shortly thereafter. While WWE is a family show, the firing seemed particularly harsh when just 3 months later, on the February 22nd episode of Raw, Vince told Shane he would get a effing beating on actual live television, which was equally inappropriate. It's unclear if Vince was fired for that blunder. I joke, of course he wasn't. Number 7. Eugene. Despite much public dislike for the Eugene gimmick, it's never a good day when a wrestler is fired, especially when the termination is as openly cruel as the one in 2009. Raw was not doing well, so WWE decided to re-sign Eugene to a contract in hopes of turning things around. Eugene's first and only televised match back was on August 10th in a contract on a pole match against The Miz, who was wearing a mask and calling himself the Calgary Kid for reasons that are not entirely clear. Unfortunately, Eugene was not in the best shape, as the man who played him, Nick Dinsmore, later revealed in an interview. Dinsmore got backstage after his match with The Miz and was told, and I'm quoting Dinsmore here, "We're not selling fat old Eugene. You're fired." This was a harsh and cruel way to let someone go. Fun fact, that was the first night that The Miz said, "I'm The Miz, and I'm awesome." Number 6. Arn Anderson. Here's a rarity, a match that got someone fired, but oddly enough, none of the wrestlers who actually participated in it. Arn Anderson, the former Four Horsemen superstar, was working as a producer for WWE in early 2019. It was February 10th at a WWE house show in Saginaw, Michigan, and one of the matches on the card was a 6-woman tag featuring Bayley, Dana Brooke, and Natalya defeating Mickie James, Nikki Cross, and Alicia Fox. On the fateful night in question, Fox reportedly showed up to work intoxicated. As you probably know, wrestling is incredibly dangerous, even when everyone is stone cold sober. So, Anderson's decision to let her go out and compete regardless was seen as an egregious dereliction of duty. Fox was benched for 2 months after the incident, but Anderson himself was fired and would appear in AEW 6 months later. Number 5. Dustin Rhodes. It seems that bleeding in wrestling can be a risky move, as both Dusty Rhodes and his son Dustin Rhodes aka Goldust found out the hard way. In 1988, Dusty was famously fired from WCW after booking a segment that involved the Road Warriors opening him up with a spike, breaking a new rule that Turner Broadcasting had laid down to disallow blood. 7 years later, at the 1995 uncensored pay-per-view, Dustin faced off against the Blacktop Bully, aka Demolition Smash and Repo Man, in a King of the Road match. This gimmick match took place on the back of a moving truck, in a cage filled with hay, and was deemed very boring by most fans. To make matters worse, both men broke WCW's no blood rule and were immediately fired as a result. It's a shame that such a high-profile departure from a major wrestling promotion became something of a Rhodes family tradition. Number 4. Jeff Jarrett. Vince McMahon will never forget. A strange incident that resulted in a wrestler's termination from WWE, 2 years after a match that left McMahon feeling uneasy. At No Mercy 1999, a clever scheme orchestrated by Jeff Jarrett and his friend Vince Russo saw its culmination. Both men were leaving WWE for WCW, where they aimed to revive the failing brand by injecting new life into it. In mid-99, Jarrett was the Intercontinental Champion and was embroiled in a feud with China. Russo convinced WWE to end the feud at No Mercy, but then promptly left the company before the pay-per-view. To WWE's surprise, Jarrett, the champion, would be out of contract at the time of the pay-per-view and had no legal obligation to perform. Jarrett demanded that Vince pay him $300,000 or he would not show up and take the belt to WCW, much like the Ultimate Warrior before him. Vince paid Jarrett's ransom before gleefully firing him on live television 2 years later, after Vince acquired WCW. Both Jarrett and Warrior are now in the WWE Hall of Fame, as WWE history resembles a long reality show of people fighting, crying, making up, fighting, crying, and fighting again. Number 3. Buff Bagwell. Although Buff Bagwell may rock a hat better than anyone this side of the Teletubbies, his career in WWE was neither long nor successful. Like many WCW stars who left the previous home for a chance at starting the Invasion storyline with WWE, Bagwell's time in WWE was brief. Instead of showing appreciation for Bagwell's loyalty, WWE humiliated him on a notorious episode of Raw in Tacoma on July 2, 2001, by smearing custard pies on his face and genitals. WWE attempted to launch WCW as its own separate brand with its own pyro, announcing team of Anderson and Scott Hudson, and a main event featuring Bagwell challenging Booker T for the WCW Championship. However, fans immediately rejected the concept of the match, bombarding it with boos and chants of "this match sucks." The backstage reaction to the match was equally strong, causing WWE to cancel the idea of a separate WCW brand immediately. Bagwell was dismissed from the company within the week, with WWE ending his career like Uma Thurman in Kill Bill. As Bagwell once said, "Your name is Buff, and you're the stuff," but unfortunately, it wasn't enough to succeed in WWE. Number 2. Teddy Hart. Teddy Hart, a talented wrestler and cat breeder, is also the nephew of Bret Hart and one of the most blacklisted individuals in professional wrestling. Despite his potential, Hart has constantly encountered legal troubles and burned bridges with multiple promotions, including WWE, Impact, Ring of Honor, AAA, and MLW, over the last 2 decades. His issues with Ring of Honor were particularly dramatic, stemming from an infamous match in 2003. During the main event Spectacles show on November 1, 2003, Hart participated in a scramble cage match that featured, among other teams, the Next Generation Hart Foundation and Jack Evans. After the planned match was over, Hart suddenly stopped selling and began performing moonsaults and shooting star presses from the top of the cage before vomiting in the ring. This kind of unplanned high-flying maneuver is incredibly dangerous, both to oneself and to the other wrestlers in the ring who have not been informed about the stunt. The locker room was so outraged that Hart was physically thrown out of the building, which led to his infamous blackballing from Ring of Honor. Unfortunately, with constant legal troubles and a history of burning bridges with multiple wrestling promotions, most agree that Hart's potential will never be fully realized. Number 1. Mr. Kennedy. Poor Mr. Kennedy had a fairly cursed run in WWE, constantly having big plans curtailed by terrible luck. After an initial undefeated streak, he was sidelined for 6 months with an injury. He came back and won the Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 23, but lost the briefcase after what appeared to be another injury that was actually much less serious than expected. Later that year, he was scheduled to be part of the huge Mr. McMahon illegitimate son angle, but that changed when he was suspended for violating the wellness policy. After yet another injury, Mr. Kennedy returned to in-ring action in May 2009, wrestling in one match. Unfortunately, that match would get him fired. It was a 10-man tag match featuring good boys wearing Lakers jerseys and bad guys wearing Nuggets jerseys. During the match, Kennedy gave Randy Orton a back suplex which saw Orton land on his neck and shoulder rather than his back. Orton was WWE champion at the time and had a history of shoulder injuries. Randy Orton persuaded John Cena to complain with him about Kennedy's recklessness to Vince McMahon, who agreed to have him released and sent packing. And that concludes our list. If you found this video entertaining, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing the video with your friends, and subscribing to German Suplex for more engaging wrestling content.